I ended up getting a replacement reverse locking cam off of eBay. I searched using the old part number and the new part number both ways, because sometimes somebody will sell one and they don't put both part numbers in. They'll put one or the other. So it's the best way to guarantee that you see what exactly is out there for a selection is to search with one part number, then search with the other part number. And anyways, what ended up happening was I came across this used one, which I just dropped. I came across this used one, which had a price of, I think, 20 bucks or best offer on it. Something like that. So I ended up giving an offer of 15 bucks and that was accepted. All of the other ones that I found on there were new, and all of the new ones were $30 and up. Most of them were pretty much around the same price, 30 or 35 bucks for a brand new one. Now, in retrospect, I wish I had bought the new one for the extra $15 that this cost me, because there are two versions of this, as far as I know. Two versions of this. And version number one, the older version, which is what I believe this is made out of some sort of a hard plastic, not unlike Bakelite type material. And the original one that was on my original lower unit that I pulled off was broken. It was cracked in two. And the later replacements appear to be cast aluminum. And I don't have to tell you that I think that the cast aluminum probably is the superior of the two. When I looked at this in the photograph that the seller had put up, it appeared to be the aluminum one, and I made the mistake of just making that assumption, and it's my fault. I could have just gave a quick message to the seller and asked them to verify if this was aluminum or plastic. And then, you know, if they said it's aluminum and it came in and it was plastic, well, then I'd have a right to gripe. But I have no one to blame but myself, because I didn't ask. And when it came in, initially I thought that maybe, oh, they used a different picture. I got the dropsies today. That they used a different photograph. You know, they use like a stock photograph and they just ship whatever they have. So at first I thought, hey, I kind of, you know, I didn't get what they said and showed in the picture. But then when I went back and looked at the picture more closely, I realized that it was just something with the lighting, I think, that made it appear aluminum. The dead giveaway that this is the one that they sent me is there's actually an area right here of discoloration that is identical to in the picture. So there's no doubt in my mind that this is the exact part that I bought, that they sent, that they had photographed. So when I looked at some aluminum ones, I noticed there appears to be 4 little dimples on the bottom here that I think is probably something that's left behind from probably the injection molding process that's used to make this thing. And it's my belief that the aluminum ones do not have those little marks. So that might be a way for somebody to avoid making the mistake I made. So at least this isn't cracked, it isn't broken. The splines on the inside there are pretty worn, so I'm not too thrilled about that. We'll see how loose it is on the shaft. But I own it now, so I might as well put it in and run with this until it fails. So I borrowed the same book from the library that I had last season. Luckily it's still there, nobody has stolen it yet. Not that anybody's going to walk into the library and walk out with it, although they probably could try and do that. But more commonly what happens with a lot of these kind of manuals is somebody takes it out and then just never returns it. And then sometimes they'll even just pay the fee, because oftentimes the libraries will underassess the value of some of these technical manuals in such a way that people will figure, hey, you know what, it's kind of like I'm buying it. But it's not really, it's stealing. So I don't like it. I always make a point of making sure I return these manuals. Okay, so anywho, first thing I got to do is I've got to get that motor tilted up. So again, right now I've got it in neutral. I've got to make sure I put it in forward before I tilt it up. Although I've got the whole thing disconnected, the reverse locking mechanism's completely disconnected, so it's not really going to break anything, but just probably a good habit to get in. So one of the first things I'm going to do is I'm going to put this linkage back in. I'm not going to make the mistake of leaving this out and then putting the whole bottom, the whole lower unit back on, and then trying to make sure that this thing gets to where it's supposed to go. So this linkage has a very distinctive shape to it. There's only two ways it could possibly go on, this way or this way, but in reality it has to go on this way because these bends are so that it can follow the contour and different shapes on the back of the tower part here. So this can be a little tricky to finagle into place if you've already got this reverse locking assembly in. And you got to make sure that this comes through this hole of this guide over here. And then you have to turn this locking lever against the spring enough for this to move into position so you can get the bolt through, or if it's a clevis pin. I don't remember what was in here originally. It was probably pretty rusted, whatever it was. So I have a stainless steel bolt that I'm using with a self-locking nut. Now I know why they used probably a pin in there, because you can't get a wrench in here to tighten this. Yeah, you can't get a wrench in there to tighten that, so I'm going to have to find a pin. Or I can make one. I could make a pin by just taking the correct size bolt and omitting the nut and drilling a hole through it for a cotter pin. If I have to, I'll do that. I found this pin on top of my bureau in my bedroom, which is where things tend to collect that I forget in my pockets before I go to bed at night and take my dirty clothes off. I empty the pockets, and oftentimes things like this tend to collect there. So I was hoping, because I don't recall this coming off of anything else, and maybe this was the one I took out of here, but it seems too short just by a small margin. Well, I'll go look and see if I have anything in my bag of tricks. All right, going to go with plan B, and I'm going to make one of these to fit that. And there's the bolt. I could just take this bolt, take the nut off of it, and drill a hole in the end here. But stainless steel fasteners are just so darn expensive. I hate to waste that nice hex stainless steel bolt on that. So what I'm going to do is, I went through my stainless steel fasteners. This has got some surface rust on it or whatever, so it might not appear it at first glance, but this is actually a stainless steel screw, and I think this is actually even metric. So it's not of much use to me, and I don't need a hex head for a clevis pin like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this. This is actually a little bit thicker diameter, but I checked the fit and it's actually pretty good. So I'm going to use this. So the first thing I got to do is, it's a little too long, so I'm going to cut that off. And to hold it in the jaws of the vise, I just get a couple of scraps of aluminum here, and I'm going to sandwich this like so in the vise jaws. It's kind of like just a little pair of soft jaws that I'm adding on there, and that'll give me the clearance so that I can tighten this down in the vise, and the vise jaws won't be hitting the head and not clamping on the shank. And this should not damage the threads too much, and even if it does, I don't care, because I'm not using this as a bolt, I'm using this as a pin. So I'll get this good and secure in my vise, and I remembered that I counted over how far I wanted to be over in threads. Got to tighten this vise back down. Ooh, that stainless steel made me earn it. And I know that's going to be hot, so. Alright, so I just went over to the grinder and I just hand ground off the burrs on the end, and I ground a flat right there. That's going to make my life a lot easier when I go to drill this thing. All right, there we go. I'm not going to win any awards, but it'll work. What? I'm going to need a pair of needle nose pliers to bend that over. Did I forget to bring any out? Well, why don't I go get the pliers, we'll bend this over, and then I'll quit for now and we'll go fishing. And then I'll come back to work on this later this afternoon if it doesn't rain. Sound like a deal? Mm-hmm. Yep. Came back from fishing, didn't catch anything. Hopefully get something done on this thing before we have to go in for the day. It's overcast and it is sprinkling. And at any moment, who knows how heavy this rain might get. So anyways, I had to go and look for those parts. Here's the original plastic cam assembly in pieces. I still actually had the chunks of it. So that's why you don't want the plastic one, if you can avoid getting a plastic one. But the reason why I needed to find those parts is because I knew I had this, which is the disc that goes below that cam. And I think its main purpose is to just give a smoother surface maybe for that cam to ride, as opposed to what's down there right now, which is the metal locking nut. So if we look down the side here, you can see there's two notches that I believe are actually so you can grab onto that retaining nut to unscrew it. But they basically designed this piece so that it's got these little ears, and it sure looks like it's just supposed to sit down inside that. Oh, pardon me. Trying to get the shot, trying to get the work done at the same time doesn't always work out. No, of course not. Why would that go in there? That makes too much sense. It doesn't seem like it's seated the way it should be seated. Aiden, do me a favor. Go over on the other side. Hand me that other pair of pliers.
You want your flashlight so you can see?
I can't really, because the problem is once the thing's in the way, there's nothing to see.
I'll just get it. You want me to?
No, I think maybe that's as far as that goes in. All right, so I think the little plastic ears aren't supposed to go down in those notches. I think the plastic ears are just supposed to hit here, and you can see they're also hitting down inside there, and that's what keeps this from spinning. Although even if this did spin, I don't know what problem that would really necessarily cause. I do know I'm going to put some grease on here. I don't know what's supposed to be on here for lubricant, but I'm going to make sure there's some grease on there before I put this all back together. I'm also going to make sure there's some grease on this cam area itself to try and make it a little bit easier for this cam to push that rod up. Try and minimize the amount of force that's going to be on here that, you know, will have a tendency to want to break this thing. So now we got the whole conundrum of, well, obviously this can go on several ways, but only one of these ways is going to be the correct way. So the idea is that we want to almost like time this cam. And I have the book, and the book basically tells me exactly how to where that should be positioned, and I can understand from the photograph exactly what they're talking about, except for one problem. They're showing me the position of that cam when it's in neutral. Well, that's all perfectly fine and dandy, except for one thing, which is that I'm pretty sure, if I recall correctly, that the default position of this is actually forward. And I believe that that's normal, that the spring-loaded dog in there wants to basically force this thing into forward gear in absence of anything holding it in either neutral or reverse, which would be the linkage. So if you had a failure of the linkage, for instance, this thing could actually snap back and just be stuck in forward gear, almost like a limp home mode, for lack of a better explanation. So if I'm not mistaken, right now this thing is in forward gear, and the way I think that that's the case is because looking at the rear, if I turn the prop shaft clockwise, I hear this, which is a ratchet and clicking effect because there's those ramp-shaped teeth that are engaging. If I try and turn this looking at the prop end, if I try and turn it counterclockwise, it actually tried to move this shaft counterclockwise, which, well, we know that we don't want that, because that my water pump impeller is in there, and this should only be turned clockwise. If the impeller is installed, you never want to turn this counterclockwise. So right now this should be, if I would turn this shaft, okay, if I turn this shaft clockwise, which is the way the motor always turns. So now, give you a wider shot. Again, I'm going to turn this shaft, which is comes out of the bottom of the motor. It's always turning. The motor only turns in one direction, always clockwise. So if I turn this clockwise, you'll notice the shaft is also turning clockwise. Which, if I had the prop on there, I could look at the blades and verify that would actually be pushing the water rearward, which would drive the boat forward. So again, right now this is in forward gear, which I believe is a default position for this thing. So if I want to put this in neutral, I've got to actually turn this shaft. So the question is, which way do you turn the shaft to get this to go into neutral? I just turned the shaft a little clockwise. That's not it. Well, I don't want to be grabbing this thing with the pliers and too hard, because I'm going to damage these splines. I don't want to do. There we go. Alright, there we go. That's neutral. Alright, so now, with this in neutral, I can install the cam in the correct position according to the manual. Alright, so what it says right here in the book is, before attaching gear case housing to the drive shaft housing, make certain that shift cam 7 and the shift lever on the motor are in the forward gear position in early models and neutral position on late models. I believe I've already realized that this is an early model. In forward gear position, shift shaft 5 should be in the clockwise position, viewed from the top end of the shaft. Complete assembly by reversing disassembly. All right, so then down here there's actually a diagram, and what it says here is, it says the reverse locking cam must be in position shown when the lower unit and the shift shaft are in neutral. So this is what I was talking about here. I don't want it in forward. I want it in forward before I put the lower unit back on, but I want it in neutral for lining up this cam. So the picture's not that great, but I can see that they're showing that there's the flat edge on the cam here. They want that flat edge. Okay, this flat edge right, let's see, this flat edge right there, they want that lined up in line with the center line. If you made an imaginary line between the center line of the shaft going towards the rear through this bolt center line, they want it lined up with that. Okay, so I'm just gonna, again, it's only going to fit so many ways, so I'm going to find out which way. Alright, so that looks pretty good right there, and if I go to the next one over, that's way off. So it's got to be more than likely this position here. So if I put this on, and it's kind of hard to see from this angle, but if I were, there we go, that's a little bit better. Try and get the camera straight on. So if I ran an imaginary line from that center point down to here, it almost looks like it goes right on the edge of this right here, which is what they show in the book. Not very clearly, but that's what it looks like. So now what I'm going to do is, now that I know that's where it should be, I'm going to do what I forgot to do, which is put a little bit of grease on that underside. That grease isn't probably going to stick around very long at all in the water, but at least it'll be something lubricating it for a little while. And now the book also says that the shift shaft should be in the clockwise position as viewed from the top, which I think we just figured that out when we were playing around with this thing. Which means if I rotate this shaft clockwise, this should go back into forward gear. Well, the question is how far? I mean, it's in forward gear right there. Maybe it's that position right there. That feels like it's almost like in a detent right there. And then if I go back, if I pull it back further, it clicks into that other kind of position. So I think that's it. I'm going to have to probably install it on the motor and try it. For anybody who hasn't already seen me struggle through putting one of these lower units on, I got to take the cowling off here so that I can get to the flywheel if necessary, because sometimes you have to bump the flywheel over just a little bit in order to get the spline shaft, drive shaft, to go up into the power head. And I always want to turn that clockwise when doing that. This little short piece of plastic tubing right here, this is strictly a guide that just stays in there for whenever the thing's together, but its main job is to give you a little bit of an extension of this water pipe downfeed tube that's up inside here, so that you can guarantee that that tube is guided into and slides into the top of the water pump housing. If you don't have this in there, when you go to put it up, there's the risk of that pipe being off to the side a little bit, and if you force it, you can actually bend or damage that pipe and the water won't flow correctly through the water pump and cool the motor, which could be catastrophic. I also put a little bit of grease on the inside of that rubber coupling there, that seal on the inside of where that pipe goes into, so that it kind of eases in there nice and easily, don't have to fight it. And a little bit of rubber on the, a little bit of grease on the gasket that goes around this exhaust tower. And that's going to make, hopefully, this go rather smoothly. Also making sure that, because this is a early model tower of power, that my shifter is still in the forward position. Well, it figures. Rain's starting to pick up. Come on. The second time I did that. And I'm worried about that shift shaft. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lower the motor down. But that's almost fully engaged now. There's just a small gap left. And I think what I want to do now is, now that I've got it almost completely snugged up, what I'd love to do is I'd love to shift it into neutral and see if this thing actuates the way it should. But I'm worried that, because I don't have the motor completely vertical the way it should, that it's going to cause a problem. On the other hand, well, yeah, that's basically, there is no other hand. Basically, that's what I'm worried about. I wonder if I can jack the back of this trailer up. Hey, up underneath the front of the trailer, I actually had a log about 5 inches in diameter holding it, the tongue off the ground. And I removed that, dropped that down, and that raised the rear end up just enough. So I got the skeg digging into the dirt a little bit there, but I've got it vertical enough. I should be able to test this locking mechanism. In other words, I actually have this part of the bracket is actually resting on that pin, and that pin isn't actually in the second position. So even if I wanted to, I could move it into the outer position a little bit. But I'm going to leave it in that position for right now, because that's the position the previous owner had it in, and this motor was on this boat, so that's the way he had it trimmed. So I can see my hooks are in the up position right now, which is where they should be, fully retracted, so that if you were going along, you're in forward gear, you're driving along, you hit something, and literally this is designed so it should be able to come up like that. So what I want to do now is, I've already verified it is in forward gear. I'm going to pull my lever up to neutral. Okay, still not locking. I can see it's not hooking, and I can't get it to go into reverse. So let me see if that's even in neutral. No, that's not in neutral. No, something's wrong.